I was sitting on my porch in Prescott, Arizona, drinking my morning coffee when a white Mercedes SUV pulled into my driveway like she owned the place. That should have been my first warning that this woman was about to turn my peaceful life upside down. She stepped out wearing what I can only describe as country club casual, complete with oversized sunglasses and a clipboard that she wielded like a weapon. Her perfectly styled blonde hair did not move an inch in the morning breeze, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval before she even looked at my property. "Good morning," I called out, trying to be neighborly despite the fact that she had just parked in my driveway without permission. "Can I help you?" "I certainly hope so," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Ponderosa Heights Homeowners Association. I need to discuss some violations with you immediately." I set my coffee down slowly, already feeling my blood pressure rise. "I'm sorry, there must be some confusion. I'm not part of any HOA." Patricia's perfectly drawn eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me? Every property in this development is part of Ponderosa Heights. The bylaws clearly state—" "Madam," I interrupted, standing up from my chair. "I'm Grant Olson, and I've owned this property for 3 years. When I bought it, there was no HOA involvement whatsoever. My deed makes no mention of any homeowners association." She actually laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that made me dislike her instantly. "That's impossible. All the properties along this street are part of our community. Now, I've noted several violations. Your fence is the wrong color, you have an unauthorized vehicle parked on the street, and your mailbox does not conform to our standards." I walked down the steps of my porch, trying to keep my cool. "Listen, Patricia, I don't know what you think is going on here, but I never signed anything agreeing to be part of your HOA. I never received any documents, and I definitely never agreed to any of your rules. Your ignorance of the bylaws does not exempt you from following them," she snapped, making a note on her clipboard. "I'm issuing you a formal notice. You have 30 days to correct these violations or face fines of $500 per violation." "You cannot fine me for anything," I said firmly. "I am not part of your association." "We will see about that," Patricia said, ripping a piece of paper from her clipboard and shoving it toward me. "This is your official notice. I suggest you take it seriously, Mr. Olson. We have ways of dealing with difficult homeowners." She turned on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes, leaving me standing there holding a piece of paper that threatened me with fines I had no legal obligation to pay. I looked down at the notice and felt anger rising in my chest. This woman had just walked onto my property, accused me of violations I did not commit, and threatened me with financial penalties for rules I never agreed to follow. I went back inside and immediately pulled out my property deed and all the documentation from when I bought the house. I spent the next hour going through every single page, and nowhere, absolutely nowhere, was there any mention of a homeowners association. No covenants, conditions, or restrictions. No bylaws. Nothing. My property was a 2-acre parcel on the outskirts of Prescott, and I had specifically chosen it because it was far enough from the main neighborhood that I would have privacy and freedom. The house itself was a modest ranch-style building that I had been slowly renovating over the years. My fence was cedar wood, natural and beautiful. My truck was parked on the street because my driveway was full with my work van. My mailbox was a simple black metal post box that the previous owner had installed. None of these things were problems. None of these things violated any legitimate rules because I was not part of any HOA. I called my real estate attorney, David Martinez, who had handled my property purchase. "David, I need you to look into something for me." I just had a woman show up at my house claiming I'm part of an HOA and threatening me with fines. Grant, we went through all of this when you bought the property, David said, and I could hear him typing in the background. Your land is not part of any homeowners association. The previous owner specifically made sure of that when he subdivided the larger parcel. Let me pull up your file. I waited while he searched through his records. After a few minutes, he came back on the line. Okay, I'm looking at everything right now. Your property is legally described as Lot 47, and it was subdivided from a larger agricultural parcel in 1998. The Ponderosa Heights HOA was established in 2005, 7 years after your lot was created. Your property predates their association and is not included in their boundaries. They have absolutely no authority over your land. Can you send me documentation of that? I asked, because this woman seems to think she can fine me. I will send you everything. If they continue to harass you, let me know. What they are doing could be considered attempted extortion. If they are trying to collect fines, they have no legal right to impose. I thanked him and hung up, feeling somewhat better but still irritated. Patricia Henderson had completely disrupted my peaceful morning, and something told me this was not going to be the end of it. I was right. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a bright orange sticker plastered across my front door. It read "Violation Notice" in huge letters and listed the same complaints Patricia had mentioned, along with a demand that I contact the HOA office within 48 hours. I ripped it off my door, furious that someone had once again trespassed on my property. I took a photo of it and sent it to David, along with a text explaining what happened. He called me back within an hour. Grant, I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter. What they are doing is harassment and trespassing. You need to make it crystal clear that they have no authority over your property and need to stop contacting you. Please do that, I said, because if Patricia shows up here again, I'm calling the police. David sent the cease and desist letter via certified mail to the Ponderosa Heights HOA. It included copies of my deed, the property survey, and a detailed explanation of why my land was not subject to their authority. It demanded that they stop all contact with me and remove me from any lists or databases that suggested I was a member of their association. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from a law firm representing the HOA. The letter claimed that despite my assertions, their records showed my property was within their boundaries, and that I owed them back dues of $3,000 plus the fines from my supposed violations, totaling another $1,500. I immediately forwarded the letter to David, who called me that evening sounding angrier than I had ever heard him. Grant, this is completely fraudulent. I've looked at the HOA's official plat map that was filed with Yavapai County, and your property is clearly outside their boundaries. They are either incredibly incompetent or they are deliberately lying. Either way, we need to respond forcefully. What do you recommend? I asked. I'm going to contact their attorney directly and provide all the documentation. If they continue after that, we will file a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and seek damages. This has gone beyond a simple misunderstanding. David sent a comprehensive response package to the HOA's attorney, including multiple surveys, the original subdivision documents, and the county records showing that my property had never been part of the HOA. He also included a warning that continued harassment would result in legal action. For about 3 weeks, things were quiet. I started to think that maybe they had finally gotten the message. Then Patricia showed up at my door again, this time with 2 other women. Mr. Olson, Patricia said in that same condescending tone, We need to discuss your continued refusal to comply with HOA regulations. And I need you to leave my property, I said, not even bothering to be polite anymore. You have received multiple letters from my attorney explaining that I am not part of your association. You are trespassing. One of the other women stepped forward. She was older, probably in her 60s, with steel gray hair and a pinched face. Young man, I am Linda Ferguson, and I have been on the HOA board for 15 years. Your attitude is completely unacceptable. We are simply trying to maintain property values in our community. Your community does not include my property, I said slowly, as if speaking to a child. My land is not within your boundaries. You have no authority here. That is where you are wrong, Patricia said, pulling out yet another piece of paper. We recently had our boundaries resurveyed, and according to our new survey, your property is included in Ponderosa Heights. I stared at her in disbelief. You cannot just resurvey boundaries to include land that was never part of your development. That is not how property law works. Our attorney disagrees, Patricia said smugly. You will be receiving formal notice to attend the next board meeting where we will discuss your violations and your outstanding fees. I will not be attending anything, I said. Now get off my property before I call the police. The three women exchanged looks, and then Patricia smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. We will see you in court then, Mr. Olson. We do not tolerate rogue homeowners who think they are above the rules. They left, and I immediately called David. They are claiming they resurveyed their boundaries to include my property. Can they even do that? Absolutely not, David said firmly. You cannot unilaterally expand HOA boundaries to include existing properties without the consent of those property owners. This is getting ridiculous. I think it is time we filed suit against them. They are clearly not going to stop. Do it, I said. I am done playing games with these people. David filed a lawsuit in Yavapai County Superior Court, seeking a declaratory judgment that my property was not part of the Ponderosa Heights HOA, along with claims for harassment, trespassing, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were asking for actual damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The HOA responded with their own lawsuit, claiming I owed them money and seeking to force me to comply with their regulations. It was exactly the kind of aggressive, bullying tactic I had come to expect from Patricia and her board. The court scheduled a hearing for both cases, which would be consolidated since they involved the same parties and issues. David assured me that we had an overwhelming case, but I still felt stressed about the whole situation. I had never been involved in a lawsuit before, and the idea of going to court was nerve-wracking. In the meantime, the harassment continued. Patricia and her minions started driving by my house multiple times a day. They would slow down, take pictures, and make notes on their clipboards. I installed security cameras around my property to document their behavior. One evening, I came home to find that someone had left a pile of garbage at the end of my driveway. My cameras caught Patricia's white Mercedes driving away from the scene. I saved the footage and sent it to David. "This is escalating," David said when he called me. "I'm going to file for a restraining order. Their behavior has crossed the line from harassment to menacing." The court granted a temporary restraining order against Patricia personally, ordering her to stay at least 100 yards away from me and my property. I thought that might finally calm things down, but instead, it seemed to enrage her. 2 days after Patricia was served with the restraining order, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted HOA violator across my fence in bright red paint. My cameras showed a figure in dark clothing doing the vandalism at 3 in the morning. The person had worn a hood and kept their face turned away from the cameras, so I could not identify them. But I had no doubt it was connected to Patricia and the HOA. I filed a police report. The responding officer, a young guy named Officer Thompson, was sympathetic, but told me that without a clear identification, there was not much they could do. But keep all your footage, he advised. If this escalates further, it will help establish a pattern of behavior. The vandalism cost me $800 to have professionally removed and the fence repaired. I documented everything for the lawsuit. The court date finally arrived on a Tuesday morning in June. I met David at the courthouse, and we went through security together. He was carrying 2 large boxes of documentation, including surveys, deeds, photographs, and all the correspondence between me and the HOA. We were assigned to Judge Robert Mitchell, a stern-looking man in his 50s who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense in his courtroom. Patricia was there with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Martin Fletcher. Judge Mitchell called the court to order and looked down at the case files in front of him. We are here regarding 2 related cases. The first is Olson versus Ponderosa Heights Homeowners Association, and the second is Ponderosa Heights HOA versus Olson. Mr. Martinez, you filed first. Please present your case. David stood and approached the podium. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of an HOA attempting to exert authority over property that is not within its jurisdiction. Mr. Olson's property, Lot 47, was subdivided from a larger agricultural parcel in 1998. The Ponderosa Heights HOA was not established until 2005. Mr. Olson's property was never part of the original development, was never subject to any covenants or restrictions related to the HOA, and is clearly outside the HOA's boundaries according to all official county records. He proceeded to present survey after survey, all showing the same thing. My property was not within the HOA boundaries. He showed the original subdivision documents, the HOA's own filed plat map, and the county assessor's records. Everything was consistent and clear. Then it was Martin Fletcher's turn. He stood up confidently, but I noticed he was not carrying nearly as much documentation as David had. Your Honor, the HOA's position is that Mr. Olson's property is functionally part of the Ponderosa Heights community. It is surrounded on 3 sides by HOA properties, and the previous owner participated in community activities. We believe that creates an implied membership. Judge Mitchell looked up sharply. Counselor, are you arguing that proximity creates HOA membership? Not just proximity, Your Honor, but the historical relationship between the properties and the community. You have any documentation showing that Mr. Olson's property is within the HOA's legal boundaries? The judge asked. Fletcher hesitated. Your Honor, we recently conducted a survey that we believe shows the boundaries should be interpreted to include Mr. Olson's property. I want to see that survey, Judge Mitchell said. Approach. Fletcher walked up with a single document. David went up as well. The judge studied it for several minutes, then looked at Fletcher with an expression that could only be described as incredulous. Counselor, this survey was conducted by whom? By a surveyor hired by the HOA, Fletcher admitted. And it directly contradicts the official county records, the original subdivision plat, and 3 separate independent surveys that all agree on where the boundaries are located. On what legal basis are you arguing that this survey supersedes all the official documentation? Fletcher looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, we believe the previous surveys were inaccurate. Based on what evidence? The judge's voice was sharp now. Based on our surveyor's assessment. Judge Mitchell sat back and looked at both attorneys. Gentlemen, I am going to make this very simple. Mr. Martinez, I am ruling in your client's favor on every count. Mr. Olson's property is clearly, unambiguously not part of the Ponderosa Heights HOA. The documentation is overwhelming. Furthermore, I am appalled at the behavior of the HOA in this matter. They have harassed Mr. Olson, trespassed on his property repeatedly, and made fraudulent claims about his legal obligations. He turned to Fletcher. Your client's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. You will not be permitted to refile any claims regarding Mr. Olson's HOA membership because the matter is now settled as a matter of law. Additionally, I am awarding Mr. Olson damages for harassment in the amount of $15,000, plus all attorney's fees and costs. Do you understand? Fletcher nodded, looking pale. Patricia, sitting behind him, had turned bright red and looked like she was about to explode. Furthermore, Judge Mitchell continued, I am issuing a permanent injunction against the Ponderosa Heights HOA and its board members. They are permanently barred from contacting Mr. Olson, entering his property, or making any claims that his property is subject to their authority. Violations of this injunction will result in contempt charges and potential criminal prosecution. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, Fletcher said quietly. David thanked the judge and we left the courtroom. As we walked down the hall, I could hear Patricia's voice rising in anger as she argued with Fletcher. I did not care. I had won completely and decisively. Congratulations, David said, shaking my hand. That was one of the most clear-cut victories I have ever had. The judge saw right through their nonsense. Thank you for everything, I said. I could not have done this without you. Just make sure you keep those security cameras running, David advised. Some people do not take losing well. He was right to be cautious. 3 days after the court hearing, I was working in my garage when I heard a vehicle pull up. I looked out to see Patricia's Mercedes parked on the street in front of my house. She got out and started walking toward my driveway. I immediately pulled out my phone and called 911. I need police assistance. There is a woman who has a restraining order against her and a court injunction, and she is currently approaching my property. The dispatcher confirmed the address and said officers were on the way. I stayed in my garage but kept my phone recording video. Patricia walked right up to my driveway and started yelling. You think you won, she screamed. You think you can just ignore the rules? We will make your life hell. I will make sure no one in this community has anything to do with you. Your property values will tank. I did not respond, just kept recording. Within 5 minutes, I heard sirens and 2 police cars pulled up. Officer Thompson was one of the responding officers, and he recognized me immediately. Madam, step away from the property, he ordered Patricia. I have every right to be here, Patricia argued. This man has been violating community standards. Madam, there is a court order prohibiting you from coming within 100 yards of this property or contacting this man in any way. You are in violation of that order right now. Patricia's face went from red to white as she seemed to realize the situation she was in. But he is ruining our neighborhood. That is not for you to decide, Officer Thompson said firmly. You need to come with us. Are you arresting me? Patricia's voice went shrill. Yes, madam. You are being arrested for violation of a court order. Please turn around and put your hands behind your back. I watched as Officer Thompson handcuffed Patricia while his partner read her rights. She continued to argue and complain the entire time, claiming this was all a misunderstanding and that she had every right to enforce HOA rules. Mr. Olson, we will need a copy of your video footage and a written statement, Officer Thompson said to me. No problem, I said. I also have her on my security cameras. Patricia was loaded into the back of one of the police cars, still protesting loudly. Her Mercedes was left parked on the street, and eventually her husband showed up to collect it, looking embarrassed and defeated. I provided my statement and all the video footage to the police. David was thrilled when I told him what happened. "This is perfect," he said. "She violated a court order in front of police officers. She is going to face criminal charges, and this will strengthen our case if there are any further issues." Patricia was charged with contempt of court and criminal trespass. She pleaded not guilty and tried to argue that she was just doing her job as HOA president, but the judge was not sympathetic. She was found guilty on both counts and sentenced to 30 days in jail, which was suspended on the condition that she complete 2 years of probation and stay completely away from me and my property. Additionally, she was forced to resign from the HOA board. The remaining board members were furious with her because her actions had cost the HOA not only the $15,000 in damages they owed me, but also their attorney's fees and court costs, which totaled another $20,000. The HOA had to levy a special assessment on all the actual members to cover the costs. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia's husband was also less than pleased. Apparently, her obsession with the HOA had been a source of tension in their marriage for years, and this was the final straw. They separated a few months later. The new HOA president, a reasonable guy named Tom who worked in construction, actually stopped by my property to apologize. He stood at the end of my driveway and called out to me rather than walking onto my land. "Mr. Olson, I just wanted to say I am sorry for everything that happened. Patricia did not represent the views of all the homeowners. We have reviewed all the documentation, and it is clear your property is not part of our association. We have updated all our records to reflect that, and you will not be contacted by us again." I appreciated his apology and told him so. "Thank you for being reasonable about this," I said. "I have nothing against HOAs in general. I just wanted my property rights respected." "Completely understandable," Tom said. "If you ever have any issues with anyone from the community, please contact me directly. I will make sure it stops immediately." We shook hands and he left. True to his word, I never heard from the HOA again. Life slowly returned to normal. I finished the renovations I had been working on, painted my fence a nice shade of cedar stain, and enjoyed my property in peace. My truck continued to park on the street when I needed it to, and my mailbox remained exactly as it was. About 6 months after everything settled down, I was at a local hardware store picking up supplies when I ran into Patricia. She was in the paint aisle, looking tired and older than I remembered. When she saw me, she actually looked ashamed. "Mr. Olson," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. What I put you through was wrong. I let my need for control and my pride get in the way of common sense and decency. I am truly sorry." I was surprised by her words. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I hope you have learned something from all this." "I have," she said. "Believe me, I have." I am no longer on the HOA board, and honestly, it is a relief. I spent so much time and energy trying to control things that did not matter. I damaged my marriage, my reputation, and my own peace of mind. And for what? To harass someone who was not even doing anything wrong. We talked for a few more minutes, and I could tell she genuinely regretted her actions. I did not forgive her completely, but I appreciated that she had at least acknowledged what she did wrong. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, always know exactly what you are buying when you purchase property. Review every document carefully and understand exactly what restrictions and obligations come with the land. Second, do not be afraid to stand up for your rights when someone tries to bully you into compliance with rules that do not apply. And third, Some people get so caught up in power and control that they lose sight of what really matters in life. I also learned that documentation is everything. If I had not kept meticulous records of every interaction, every letter, and every incident, the case might not have been so clear-cut. My security cameras were invaluable in proving the harassment and vandalism. David and I stayed in touch, and he actually referred several other clients to me who were having HOA disputes. I was able to share my experience and help them understand their rights. In a couple of cases, people discovered that, like me, their properties were not actually within the HOA boundaries despite years of paying dues and following rules. One of those cases involved an elderly couple, the Martinsons, who lived about a mile from me. They had been paying HOA dues for 10 years, even though their property had been excluded from the development boundaries due to a surveying error when the HOA was first established. When they contacted me after hearing about my case, I referred them to David, who helped them get back every penny they had paid in dues, plus interest. The Martinsons were thrilled and sent me a beautiful fruit basket as a thank you. I also became somewhat of a local expert on property rights and HOA law. I did not seek out that role, but people kept asking me questions, and I was happy to help. I even gave a presentation at the local library about how to protect your property rights, and more than 50 people showed up. The Ponderosa Heights HOA eventually stabilized under Tom's leadership. He implemented reasonable policies, focused on actual community improvements rather than nitpicky rule enforcement, and treated homeowners with respect. Property values in the area actually increased because people wanted to live in a community with a functional, reasonable HOA rather than a dictatorial one. Patricia moved away about a year after everything ended. I heard she and her husband reconciled and bought a property in Sedona, somewhere without an HOA. I hope she found peace there and learned to enjoy life without trying to control everyone around her. As for me, I continued to enjoy my 2 acres of freedom. I added a workshop behind my house, planted a vegetable garden, and adopted 2 dogs who loved running around the property. None of these things would have been possible if I had actually been part of an HOA with restrictive rules. I also made sure to share my story with anyone buying property in the area. I wanted people to understand the importance of knowing exactly what they were getting into, and not assuming that just because a realtor or a seller says something, it is true. Always verify. Always check the actual legal documents and never be afraid to ask questions. One of the most satisfying moments came about 18 months after the court case, when I received a check in the mail for the full amount of damages the court had awarded me. The HOA had initially tried to drag their feet on payment, but David filed an enforcement motion, and the judge ordered them to pay immediately or face additional penalties. That $15,000, combined with the money I saved on not having to pay bogus HOA dues and fines, made the whole ordeal worthwhile from a financial perspective. But the real victory was not the money. It was standing up for myself and refusing to be bullied. It was knowing that I had protected my property rights and that no one could force me to comply with rules I never agreed to follow. It was the peace of mind that came from knowing I could live my life on my terms, on my land, without someone like Patricia telling me what color my fence should be or where I could park my truck. I thought about all the people who probably just comply when an HOA makes demands, even if those demands are not legitimate. They pay the fines, change their fences, move their vehicles, all because they are intimidated or do not want to deal with the conflict. I understood that impulse, but I also knew that sometimes you have to fight back against unreasonable authority. My case became something of a cautionary tale in the local real estate community. Realtors started being more careful about verifying HOA membership before listing properties. Title companies added extra scrutiny to their searches for covenant and restriction information. And several other HOAs in the area became more careful about verifying their boundaries and not making claims about properties that were not actually within their jurisdiction. I even got a letter from the county assessor's office thanking me for bringing the boundary issue to their attention. Apparently, my case prompted them to review all the HOA boundaries in the county and correct several mapping errors. It turned out there were at least a dozen other properties that had been incorrectly associated with HOAs in the county's database. The whole experience, as frustrating and stressful as it was, ultimately strengthened my confidence and my understanding of property law. I became a better advocate for myself and others. I learned to stand my ground against bullies and to trust in the legal system to protect legitimate rights. I also gained a deep appreciation for good attorneys like David. He had been professional, knowledgeable, and aggressive when necessary. He never backed down from Patricia's intimidation tactics or the HOA's legal maneuvering. He knew the law, knew my rights, and fought to protect them. That kind of representation is invaluable, and I made sure to leave him a glowing review online and recommend him to everyone I could. Looking back now, I can almost laugh at how absurd the whole situation was. Patricia had been so convinced of her authority, so certain that she could force me to comply, that she could not accept the simple truth that my property was not hers to regulate. She had turned a non-issue into a major legal battle that cost her organization tens of thousands of dollars, cost her her position on the board, damaged her marriage, and resulted in her arrest, all because she could not accept that she did not have power over me. The day I finally took down the last security camera, about 2 years after everything ended, felt liberating. I had kept them up out of caution, but eventually, I realized I did not need them anymore. Patricia was gone. The HOA had accepted reality, and my property was truly mine without any threats or harassment. I stood in my yard on a beautiful spring evening, looking at my cedar fence with its natural stain, my truck parked on the street where it belonged, and my simple black mailbox standing at the end of my driveway. These ordinary things had become symbols of my freedom and my victory over unreasonable authority. My dogs ran circles around me, happy and free on our 2 acres of land that no one else could control. I thought about Patricia, wherever she was, and hoped she had found contentment in a life without the burden of trying to regulate everyone around her. As the sun set over the Arizona hills, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on my porch, the same spot where this whole mess had started when Patricia first pulled into my driveway uninvited. But now, sitting in that same spot, I felt only peace. I had defended my property, my rights, and my freedom. I had refused to be intimidated by someone who had no legitimate authority over me. And I had won, not through aggression or escalation, but through standing firm on the truth and letting the legal system work as it was designed to work. The story of my battle with the Ponderosa Heights HOA spread throughout Prescott and the surrounding communities. I received calls from reporters wanting to write about it, from law students wanting to study it as a case example, and from countless homeowners who were dealing with similar issues. I helped where I could, sharing my experience and offering advice. Some people asked me if I regretted buying the property or wished I had just moved somewhere else to avoid the whole conflict. The answer was always no. This was my land, my home, and I had every right to be here. Moving would have been letting Patricia and the HOA win, would have been admitting that bullies can drive you away from your own property. Instead, I stayed, I fought, and I won. And now, sitting on my porch on my 2 acres of freedom, I could not imagine being anywhere else. The experience also taught me compassion for people trapped in bad HOA situations. I heard horror stories from people who actually were members of HOAs and were being fined for ridiculous violations or bullied by power-hungry board members. Some of them could not afford to fight back legally. Others were trapped because moving was not financially feasible. I tried to help where I could, offering advice and sometimes connecting people with David or other attorneys who might take cases pro bono or on contingency. I figured that since I had been lucky enough to have the resources and the clear legal position to fight back successfully, I should use that experience to help others. One woman, Susan, contacted me about her HOA fining her for having the wrong shade of white paint on her house. She had matched the approved color exactly, but the HOA president claimed it looked different in certain light and demanded she repaint. The fines were accumulating at $100 per day, and she was facing thousands of dollars in penalties for something completely subjective and unreasonable. I connected her with David, who sent the HOA a strongly worded letter pointing out that their color enforcement was arbitrary and capricious. He threatened to file suit for harassment and abuse of power. The HOA backed down immediately and waived all the fines. Susan was grateful beyond words. These small victories for other people made my own battle feel even more worthwhile. If my experience could help others stand up to HOA bullying, then all the stress and conflict had served a larger purpose. As time went on, I became more involved in local efforts to reform HOA laws in Arizona. I testified before a state legislative committee about the need for better protections for homeowners and clearer processes for disputing HOA claims. Some of my suggestions were incorporated into new legislation that provided more transparency in HOA operations and stronger penalties for HOAs that abused their authority. I never set out to become an activist or an expert on HOA issues. I just wanted to live peacefully on my property. But sometimes life pushes you into roles you never expected, and you discover you have the ability to make a difference. My relationship with the Ponderosa Heights community eventually normalized. I would see people from the HOA at local businesses or community events, and most of them were friendly and respectful. The few who still seemed to hold a grudge were easy to ignore. Tom remained HOA president for several years and did an excellent job of keeping the organization focused on legitimate community needs rather than petty rule enforcement. I even attended a few community events in the Ponderosa Heights common areas, at Tom's invitation. It felt strange at first, being in the HOA community as a guest rather than a resident, but people were welcoming and friendly. Many of them told me they were glad I had stood up to Patricia because her aggressive tactics had been making everyone miserable, not just me. One older gentleman, Frank, who had lived in Ponderosa Heights since it was founded, pulled me aside at one of these events. "You know, I am on the board now and we reviewed all the records from your case. Patricia knew from the beginning that your property was not part of the HOA. She just could not stand that there was a piece of property right in the middle of our area that she could not control. It was pure ego and spite. I am sorry you had to go through all that." His words confirmed what I had suspected. Patricia had not made an honest mistake. She had deliberately tried to bully me into submission, knowing she had no legal leg to stand on. That made her behavior even worse, but it also made my victory even sweeter. The years passed, and life continued peacefully on my 2 acres. I eventually met someone special, a woman named Rebecca who worked as a veterinarian in Prescott. We bonded over our love of dogs and the outdoors, and she appreciated my independent spirit and my willingness to stand up for what was right. When I told her about the HOA battle, she laughed and said, "Of course you stood up to them. You would not be you if you had just rolled over and accepted their nonsense." Rebecca moved in with me about a year into our relationship, and we talked about getting married. She loved the property as much as I did, and had no interest in living somewhere with an HOA breathing down our necks about every little detail. "This is perfect," she said, standing in the yard with both dogs running around her. "This is freedom. This is what home should feel like." I could not have agreed more. We got married in a small ceremony on the property, surrounded by close friends and family. Tom from the HOA even attended, having become a genuine friend over the years. There was no drama, no interference, no one telling us what we could or could not do on our own land. It was exactly how it should be. Standing there with Rebecca, looking out over our property, I thought about how different my life might have been if I had given in to Patricia's demands 3 years earlier. I might have paid thousands in dues and fines for rules I should never have been subject to. I might have changed my fence, moved my truck, replaced my mailbox, all to appease someone who had no legitimate authority over me. Instead, I had stood my ground, fought for my rights, and won. And now I was standing on my land, married to an amazing woman, surrounded by friends, living exactly the life I wanted to live. The battle with Patricia and the Ponderosa Heights HOA had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also been worth it. It had taught me about myself, about the importance of standing up to bullies, and about the value of freedom and independence. As the sun set on our wedding day, casting golden light across the Arizona landscape, I raised a glass with our guests and made a toast. To freedom, to property rights, and to never letting anyone tell you what you can and cannot do on your own land. Everyone cheered, and Rebecca squeezed my hand. "To standing your ground," she added, smiling at me. "To standing your ground," I agreed, and that is exactly what I had done. I had stood my ground against an HOA that tried to force me to join, despite the fact that their boundaries did not include my property at all. I had fought back against harassment, trespassing, and fraudulent legal claims. I had endured vandalism, threats, and months of stress. But in the end, I had won. My property remained mine, free and clear of any HOA control. The court had ruled decisively in my favor. Patricia had faced consequences for her criminal behavior, and the HOA had been forced to pay damages and leave me alone permanently. It was a complete victory, and sitting on my porch years later, I could look back on the whole experience with satisfaction. I had protected what was mine, stood up for what was right, and refused to be intimidated by someone who thought power and position gave them the right to control others. The simple truth was that Patricia and the HOA had no legitimate claim to authority over my property. They had tried to bully me into compliance through harassment and intimidation. When that did not work, they had escalated to vandalism and criminal behavior, but I had not backed down. I had documented everything, hired a good attorney, and let the legal system work. And the legal system had worked exactly as it should have, protecting my property rights and punishing those who had violated them. As I sat there on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt grateful for everything that had happened. Not because I enjoyed conflict or legal battles, but because the experience had taught me so much about myself and about the importance of standing up for what is right. I had learned that you cannot let bullies win, even when fighting back is difficult and stressful. I had learned that documentation and evidence are crucial when facing legal challenges. I had learned that good legal representation can make all the difference in protecting your rights. Most importantly, I had learned that property rights matter. The ability to own land and control what happens on that land is fundamental to freedom. When organizations like HOAs overstep their authority and try to control property they have no claim to, they are not just being annoying or petty. They are violating fundamental rights that our entire legal system is designed to protect. Patricia had learned that lesson the hard way, through legal defeat, criminal conviction, and public humiliation. The Ponderosa Heights HOA had learned it through tens of thousands of dollars in damages and legal fees. And hopefully, other HOAs and power-hungry board members who heard about my case learned it too. You cannot simply claim authority over property that is not yours. You cannot bully people into compliance with rules that do not apply to them. And if you try, you will face legal consequences. That is the way it should be, and that is exactly what happened in my case. As darkness fell completely and stars began to appear in the Arizona sky, I stood up from my porch and went inside, where Rebecca was waiting with dinner ready. My dogs followed me in, tails wagging, completely content with their life on our 2 acres of freedom. Tomorrow I would wake up and continue living my life on my terms, on my property, without interference from anyone who thought they knew better than me how I should live. My fence would remain its natural cedar color, my truck would park wherever I needed it to park, and my mailbox would stay exactly as it was. Because this was my land, my home, and no HOA had any right to tell me otherwise. The courts had confirmed it, the law had protected it, and I had fought for it. And that made all the difference. The story of Grant Olson versus the Ponderosa Heights HOA ended the way all such stories should end. With property rights protected, bullies defeated, and justice served. It was not always easy, and it was not always pleasant, but it was absolutely worth it. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat to protect my freedom and my right to live peacefully on my own land.